Welcome to the Arate Podcast, the podcast created to help senior executives and the organisations they lead live up to their full potential. Join us for cutting-edge interviews with leading senior executive and board members across all industry sectors, and for practical tips to accelerate your executive career. And now, here's your host, Richard Triggs.
Been a long time coming, and I remember so well when I first met you many years ago, working at Cardno, and we've stayed in touch ever since then. And obviously your career has evolved and you're up to all sorts of, new and exciting things. So just why don't we start off by telling us a little bit about what you're up to now professionally?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you very much for having me, by the way.
Absolute
I was trying
pleasure.
to remember when we first met, but you're right. I think it was when I was at Cardno. So it's a fair while ago. It must be like 15 years ago, I think. In terms of what I'm doing now, so I have a sort of a portfolio career now. I tend to work on a number of boards. I do a bit of consulting work, strategic consulting, generally with boards and C-suite. And I do speaking work and writing work. But most recently, I think the thing I'm most excited about is I've just launched something called Sprott Methods, which is really about providing lots of different resources to those people who want to improve their business leadership skills. So it's something that I'm pretty excited about. It was 3 years in the making, so it's good to have it live.
Yeah, fantastic. And, that's really what encouraged me to reach out to you for this chat, because I had seen your I suppose, launch information about your new business ventures, both on LinkedIn, and I think you and I are friends on Facebook. And
Yeah.
I thought, oh, wow, that sounds exciting what Kylie's doing now. It's really interesting to see, there are some people who have their executive career and then they either voluntarily exit it or they get exited due to redundancy. And then they think to themselves, well, really, what can I do? I know I'll get some board roles. Whereas what you've done is you've really embraced what I believe is a true portfolio career, consulting, board work, speaking, mentoring, coaching, etc. And then that's evolved into an actual, Sprott Methods, which is, really taking it to that ultimate level, which is so exciting. So tell us, about Sprott Methods.
Yeah, sure. And it's a funny thing because it was about 3 years ago. I had what I think some of my friends thought was a bit of a midlife crisis, where I really started to think about whether or not I want to keep doing executive work. And I've been doing executive work and board work in parallel for a long time. So I spent a lot of time just kind of figuring out what I'm really passionate about. And I love writing and I love coaching and really helping other people learn from some of my lessons. And I think after 25 years in executive roles, I had quite a lot of experience across lots of different industries. And over again, a lot of people just kept on saying to me, how can you share your learnings to a broader audience? And at first it was really just started out with my writing and then it started to become more of a collaboration type platform. So Sprott Methods is effectively where I've collaborated with leaders from around the world. So we have interviews with, these really interesting leaders talking about where they've had really challenging moments. There's ebooks there that a whole range of different authors have written. There's mentoring programs and coaching programs with leaders in the US and the UK and Australia. And I think also one of the things I'm really excited about is we have these events where we get to basically showcase leaders and talking about particular topics, not just people leadership, but business leadership. So it could be anything from philanthropy through to ESG, for instance. And also we've developed a masterclass. So working with Dr. Ellen Bolke, who has her PhD in organizational psychology from London School of Economics. Together, we've put together this psychology-based masterclass for 2 days for leaders to really delve into why they handle things in a certain way and why they get triggered in a certain way and how to why they connect with some people faster than others and how to really be conscious of those different aspects when you're actually leading teams, which is particularly important for really senior leaders. So I suppose it's taken 3 years and a lot of collaboration but it's also great just to showcase all these other amazing leaders that I've managed to meet. So it's not just my methods, it's all these other methods that have been gathered from these different leaders from around the world.
It's interesting because it used to be that leaders would go, okay, I'm stepping outside of my core discipline. I need to now broaden out my strategic leadership capability. I'll go and do an MBA, or I'll go and do the AICD course. But there's a lot more opportunity now for people to have a more holistic and more real-time leadership education. And, one of the things, Kylie, I always admired about you is coming from a sort of an HR specialist career, and then moving into taking on a broader range of responsibilities. And then more recently doing interim CEO work. And so unlike an academic at university, you're bringing that really, broad and deep experience, and then also engaging with other thought leaders in the space. So I suppose, why did you decide to do this? And secondly, how do people engage with what you're doing in order to start this learning experience?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that are important to me. Is that I do feel very fortunate. I've had a lot of broad experience across managing a whole range of different functions across many different industries and in different countries as well. So there's a lot of, I guess, core learnings that I'm pretty keen to share, but also really being respectful of all the other amazing leaders I've worked with and their key learnings. But also, and I think you're a bit the same, Richard. I just like to cut through all the nonsense and all the noise. So that's really how I roll. I prefer to just sort of cut through all the noise and get to what you need to know. And I think nowadays a lot of leaders, they just want to have, good nuggets of information that they can digest. And if they need to go deeper, they can go deeper. But one of the things we're doing with Methods is just being really practical and giving really good advice on a whole range of different topics that you need to know as an effective business leader. But not necessarily going so deep it's like an MBA level. This is really giving you a good understanding. So, for instance, if you're a new leader and you don't really understand risk, but you're too embarrassed to point out, I don't really know what you're talking about when you're talking about risk management, you can jump on there, and there's actually resources there that can help you get a good understanding about what it means. Also, things like strategy, things that you really need to have a bit of an understanding on. But I've found a lot of leaders don't necessarily have that breadth. And so they could be sitting in situations in particularly when they get quite senior roles, it's embarrassing to admit, I actually don't know that stuff very well. So this is an opportunity for everyone to sort of gain knowledge and understand a whole range of different broad topics that you really need to know without all that extra noise and chatter. So, and from people who've actually done it.
Yeah, that's it. It's interesting you use risk as an example, because I run some business leader mastermind type groups. They're called Breakfast of Champions. And I was running one just this morning, and one of the guys who owns an engineering company was talking about how a couple of weekends ago he was riding his motorbike and he fell off, and he broke 5 ribs, and he was hospitalized for a few days. And I mean, he was back in my meeting within 2 weeks. So he obviously wasn't, terribly injured. But he said, because we had a risk register that I'd put in place, the business was able to function without me, and people were able to follow this risk register, and it was pretty smooth sailing. And so there were 12 business owners, CEOs around the table. And so I just thought I'll ask the question, how many of us actually have a risk register? And probably 3 out of 12, right?
Oh, wow.
So including myself, I don't have one either, right? So, something like that, I mean, even for somebody who's gone to university and done an MBA or done the AICD course and understands, it's a difference between understanding and implementing, isn't it? So if you can simplify, okay, well, what does this practically mean, and how do you practically take advantage of that in your business? That's really where the rubber hits the road, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that what we've done is that you'll see with the branding, right? There's a little unicorn in there, and there's a couple of reasons for that. But one, you see the unicorn horn kind of slashes through everything, which is symbolic of cutting through all the noise and getting to what you need to know. Like, no nonsense, just getting to what you need to know. But also, a business leader in terms of a business unicorn is someone who has good broad knowledge, gets really good results, but they're also good at leading people. So, and they've got a bit of humility and grace in there. So, and all of those things really speak to how I like to operate. So, so the whole thing about sort of creating business leaders who are unicorns is about just cutting through the nonsense, getting to what you need to know, but making sure you've got good, broad knowledge so you don't fall into those traps, a little bit like crisis management, right? That's another one. There's a whole bunch of things that you need to have a bit of an understanding and a good broad understanding of a whole range of topics to be a good leader.
Yeah. So interesting. Unicorns. So often unicorn, people talk about unicorns because it's a mythical creature. It doesn't actually exist, right? And so you're talking about business leaders being unicorns. I mean, is there such a thing? And do you think that you can learn to be a unicorn, or how much of being a unicorn is inherent? Some people have got it, but most people don't.
That's a hard question, right? But look, firstly, if you Google a business unicorn, business leader unicorn, it'll come up with it is actually not something, it's not a mythical thing that I've created, but the unicorn itself is a mythical creature. But what I love the most about it is it's actually the national animal for Scotland. Can you believe that? Which I find hilarious. Out of like all the animals they could have chosen, they chose a mythical creature as their national animal. And so for me, it's also a bit of a sentimental nod towards my Scottish ancestors. So I kind of love that element as well, and the kind of magical piece around it, But I have come across many unicorn leaders in my time, and they're the ones that, they do have that humility. They do have that broad knowledge. They're not necessarily just a specialist in one area. They have this kind of curiosity about always wanting to learn. And because they have humility and grace, they don't think they know it all, but in actual fact, that's what makes them so special. But getting results, but also being good at in terms of people leadership. These are things that I think you can learn, and having good broad knowledge is something you can learn. Some people are, naturally more curious and potentially find the people leadership stuff easier. But I think all of the things that we're trying to do is to give people a really good basis to have good leadership skills, not just in terms of people, but also business side. So it's and look, these are the things that I'm most fascinated by. So when you say, why on earth did you go off and do this? I think it's because I like to write, and usually when I write something, it's usually because I'm fascinated by a particular angle or topic or something. And so I've written, I think it's almost 30 business articles, but they're always about things like, drawing conclusions from Top Gun, for instance. What are the 5 top lessons we can get from Top Gun? Or, how Ted Lasso can teach us about the difference between humility and hubris and how to find the sweet spot. So I'm just really interested in terms of how do I translate that curiosity I have about always wanting to become better in terms of business leadership, and also just imparting that stuff to other people who have the same kind of, real thirst for that sort of knowledge and curiosity.
I suppose it's interesting that you draw parallels or use as a metaphor Top Gun and Ted Lasso and so on, because I've just started watching Ted Lasso for the second time.
I've watched it 3 times. I love it so much.
Well,
so
to have a little brief segue, I've just been watching that Welcome to Wrexham. Have you seen that show?
Oh, yeah, that's like the real life Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
I haven't been watching that, but I've heard it's very good.
It's fantastic. And so so I watched that, and then I thought, I should watch Ted Lasso again. And it's interesting as a business leader. I mean, there is a lot of lessons to learn from this fictional character in this show. He's so beautiful, and he's got such a charming way of leading that it's. I can see why you would look at that and say, okay, well, this is some good opportunities to tell some stories and for people to be able to get it because they've watched the show.
Yeah. Well, I love Ted, obviously. How could you not love Ted? But the characters that I loved the most and probably learned the most watching were the ones who seemed mostly flawed, and how you can kind of see their character development happening. And so I love Rampaging Roy. How could you not love him? He's probably my favorite character. But I just also loved how some of the others that, that you initially had kind of pigeonholed change. Like Nate's a great example, right? How he kind of goes through this dark time and then comes back at the end. And there's lots of good lessons in there. And like, especially around humility, right? So Nate starts off with all this humility, then just loses it, and then eventually manages to get that back. And
spoiler alert there, folks, if you haven't seen it before.
Gosh, if you haven't seen Ted Lasso, what have you been doing with your life? Yeah.
my favorite character is Beard.
Yes,
I
yes,
love beard.
yes,
But
yes.
okay, so next article, I'll put in a request. I want leadership according to Tony Soprano.
My goodness me, yeah. Okay, I might consider that one. I haven't actually written an article for a little while, but I was actually thinking about
Right.
it this morning, and sometimes these ideas come into my head, and I jot them all down, and I have a little list of ideas, and one of them that has been kind of floating around for a little while is about, and so this is a spoiler alert because I will be writing this at some point, is the malaise of mediocrity. Because one of the things that, again, and why I love learning from other leaders is because I don't want to be mediocre. And so
Mm.
there's a drive to always be improving. But I found it really interesting how some people do fall into this kind of malaise of mediocrity. And what does that say about culture and the leaders? And why? Because it's not really satisfying to have, that feeling of, just kind of going to the lowest common denominator. So I'm keen to explore that a little bit more and what that actually means for leaders.
Yeah, I'd probably play a bit of devil's advocate there, and that there are a lot of people who think to succeed you have to be driven, to perform and improve,
Mm.
and yet there's something to be said for being comfortably confident that you're doing okay, and that
Yeah,
it's
yeah, true.
okay to be okay, right? But
Yeah, and also to be, I've actually sometimes, I was talking to my friend Sarah about this once, and I said, why is it that some people are very happy to have a job where they just go to work every day, do the 9 to 5, and why are there lunatics like us who have this constant need to constantly be striving to do more and to do more and to do more? And I'm really curious about that, but I actually wouldn't say that those people are mediocre, by the way, and I wouldn't say that they're stuck in a malaise because they've found their sweet spot. It's the people who are doing the bare minimum and aren't really getting a lot of joy. Is probably more about what I'm saying is that the people who aren't really getting a lot of satisfaction out of their day-to-day existence.
yeah, exactly. And I
Mm.
often think about that. I think, oh, life would be so much easier if I had a job. I loved the Broncos.
Yeah,
I was a Holden supporter, and I took my family for 4 weeks holiday on Bribie Island.
I
Uh,
know,
how good would it be? But
I know.
we're just not. Perhaps we have some undiagnosed mental condition. So anyway,
I don't know.
coming back to the Sprott method. Okay, so people go, okay, cool. I'd like to engage in that. There's obviously potentially some great learning opportunities here for me. So,
Yeah,
I mean, you've created this platform now. So
yeah, yeah.
how do people come into the platform, and how do they access and get best use of what you have to offer?
So it's sprottmethods.com. It's and you can there's subscription models for both individuals and for corporates. Obviously for corporates the pricing's better, and the more people who are involved the better the pricing. But one of the things that's great, regardless of whether you're an individual or a corporate, is we really want to make it an opportunity for people to engage in events as well, rather than just having online material. Although some people just love doing that. So if you're a subscriber, you get this free access to the events. Whereas if you're not a subscriber, you have to pay obviously to attend the events.
Mm.
So that means if you are into, wanting to, attend events, get kind of, an opportunity to really talk to the person who's the guest speaker or the featured speaker talking about a particular topic, then it's a great opportunity because we're trying to keep them lower than 50 people. We're trying to have really interesting speakers. Like one of the ones that we're having later this year in Brisbane is around philanthropy and fundraising. And
Hmm.
so we've got the head of fundraising for Currumbin Wildlife Sanctuary, and who's done her studies in philanthropy at QT. Is also the founder and creator of Women of Influence. So just talking about why she's into philanthropy and fundraising. So
Fantastic.
yeah, so if you're kind of interested in those things, you can, if you're a subscriber, not only do you get access to all the material online, you also get to come along to the events for free. So we're really hoping that that will be an opportunity for people to also sort of connect into the community. But yeah, there's also LinkedIn. If you're on LinkedIn and you check out Sprott Methods on LinkedIn, there's we post at least twice a week, and there's also a I call it, I love alliteration, Richard. In case if you look on the Sprott Methods site, it's all this alliteration everywhere. It's like, methods, moments, methods in the madness, more methods, all these different bits of alliteration. But I also like to write the newsletter, but I've called it the Methods Muse-letter, M-U-S-E. So yeah, you can sign up to that too. So anyone who's interested, if you check out LinkedIn, Sprott Methods there, or if you go to the site, sprottmethods.com, and you can also sign up for the newsletter. And then you hear about all the things that are coming up, and we're releasing content pretty regularly. At least every fortnight, there's new content coming out.
Excellent. And so another string to your bow, Kylie, is your board involvement. And I note that you're currently on a number of boards. What would you say has allowed you to grow your board capability? And as a board director, what's your unique selling proposition? Because I get a lot of people who come to me, oh, Richard, I'm chasing director opportunities. And of course, one of the first things I say to them is they need to get qualified. But it's really how to build a personal brand as somebody who can truly contribute and make a difference on a board. So how have you developed and refined that for yourself?
Yeah, so I think I agree with you. Going and doing the course of the AICD is a really good starting point, because then you have a clarity around the levels of responsibility. And I think also I was fortunate. I probably for about 8 or 9 years, I did board work in parallel with my executive work. So that kind of helped me. But I think being very clear on where I sit in the skills matrix is very helpful, because every board generally has a skills matrix. And so you can see, I know where my skills sit in there. And generally, my skills are very much around mergers and acquisitions, people and culture, technology, health and safety, ESG, a lot of business transformation and change, stakeholder engagement and management, and also risk. So I can very quickly look at a skills matrix and say to an organization, if you need someone with these skills, particularly around people and culture and technology and transformation, they seem to be very attractive to most organizations. But I can kind of also point to the fact that I've, have a pretty good understanding of risk and strategy, and that I work with a lot of C-suite executives. So being able to say that, and also being able to transfer my skills across multiple different industries. So some people get very focused on one industry. I've worked across a range of different industries because my skills are very transferable. So I can I've gone from everything from manufacturing to engineering to animal welfare more recently. So yeah, and really it's often the same kind of challenges and opportunities, and being able to bring that kind of different range of skills to the board is helpful. But I also think that I talked before about curiosity and having this kind of curious a way of approaching life, and I bring that to the board as well. So I find that sometimes going into an industry where I don't have a lot of experience, my curiosity is actually a massive benefit, because I'll ask questions from a place of curiosity that sometimes uncover risks or opportunities that haven't been previously discussed.
And out of interest, just for my own benefit, in terms of the board roles that you currently have and have had previously, how many of those have come through you've applied for an advertised board vacancy versus what I call the hidden job market?
Yeah, it's interesting that you'd say that. I'd say it's probably 50-50.
Okay.
Like, some of them definitely have come through my connections and I've read your great book on the hidden job market. It was excellent, by the way, some feedback there. So I would say probably half and half, half of them have come through connections, and the other half have come through going through a very formal process. And it's good to have experience with both of those, because it's a very different, kind of engagement when you're going through those two different processes. It's helpful to have gone through multiple interviews with an organization that doesn't know anything about you, because it helps you kind of sharpen up your interview technique and being very clear on your value proposition. But also, I think having a good network and making sure people understand that you're available for opportunities and that you have the right skills to bring to a board is also a good way of sourcing those opportunities.
One of the things I love about recruiting board roles is that if I'm recruiting executive role, So I've just been engaged to recruit a CEO for an agri business. I have to headhunt a CEO and say, you need to give up your current CEO gig to take on this new CEO gig. Whereas when you're recruiting in the board space, the line we use, which obviously is, have you got room on your dance card, which basically means, have you got capacity to take on an additional board role? And so that makes the recruitment process a bit easier, a bit more fun. And so I suppose, Kylie, have you got room on your dance card?
Yes, I have. And actual fact, I have got room on my dance card at the moment. And one of the things that I think is really helpful for other people who are in doing the portfolio career is that sometimes if you look at someone's CV, it looks like, oh, it's very full. Like if you looked at my LinkedIn profile, you'd say, oh, she must be at full capacity. So certainly what I've done on my board CV now is I actually talk about the meeting commitments.
Right.
So, some of them are only quarterly meeting commitments and some of them are once a month. And some are just ad hoc every now and then. So I always think it's very important for those of us who have those portfolio careers to be open about when you've got capacity on your dance card, but also making sure it's really clear about what your level of commitment is with your current boards, because sometimes it is only quarterly. So it's important to show that so that people don't think that you're completely at capacity.
Absolutely. And then you also promote yourself as director, advisor, speaker. So we've talked a bit about the director side of things, but tell us about the advisory piece.
Yeah, so I think that again, it's probably a little bit connected to the stuff I do around Sprott Methods. I found that I've been engaged on with a number of different organisations to work often directly with the CEO or the C-suite, sometimes with the board, but generally with the CEO and the C-suite, to give them independent advice, particularly if they might be doing something where I have an area of expertise. So sometimes it's really useful for the C-suite to have someone who can give independent perspective, particularly around things like transformation. Transformation programs are exceedingly expensive and often prone to failure. So a lot of CEOs like to have someone who's got an independent perspective to say whether or not something looks right. And whether or not the change management's at the right pace, whether or not the program's been well thought out. Because I've got a bit of experience in that space, I've often been able to help CEOs with that. Also with a lot of post-merger integration work, because I've done about 30 of those, the post-merger piece is actually really critical. A lot of executives get really hung up in that first part, which is doing the deal, and they get that white line fever, about getting over the line to get the deal done. But the hard work often comes afterwards, which is the post-merger integration. So I've done quite a bit of work in terms of working with CEOs and C-suite in terms of how to really maximise your chances of making sure that deal actually is very successful after the deal is done.
Sure. So how do you differentiate between coach, mentor, and advisor?
A lot of them, they kind of do blend in together. And often I have been engaged to do coaching work with CEOs and chairs, and it tends to blend into that advisory space. But if it's a coaching assignment, I typically am engaged for a period of time. It could be from 6 months to 12 months on an agreed rate. And generally, we have an agreed amount of time that we spend together. And that's a pretty enjoyable thing to do, to be honest with you, is you're basically a sounding board. When you're engaged for an advisor, it's often for a specific piece of work. So it's not so much about just general coaching, it's more about a specific piece of work. So one organisation engaged me to basically be there for the CEO and engaged in their post-merger integration program, which we knew would be for 6 months. Another organisation engaged me to help the CEO with his new executive team, and so I came in for a number of days for a period of time. I think that one was initially for 6 months as well. So the mentoring and coaching is probably a different kind of engagement. It's like one-on-one with a particular individual, whereas the advisory work is often for a particular piece of work rather than an individual per se.
Right. And would you say that you prefer one of those three modalities over the others, or you're pretty comfortable sitting in each different chair?
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with all of them. In fact, I just think that one of the things that has made me pleased with having a portfolio career is I love variety. And, it really does help that curiosity thing, like, because I'm constantly learning and having opportunities to meet different people. So for me, I like lots of different variety in my working life. So yeah, I'm comfortable with all of those.
Great. And so let's talk about the third string to the bow. So director, advisor, speaker. Professional speaking is an interesting, place to play, and certainly not for the faint-hearted, as I've learnt myself over the years. But tell us about your speaking commitments.
Well, I think I'm a bit of an unusual character in that I really enjoy public speaking. In fact, I can probably tell you there's only been 2 occasions where I felt nervous, and otherwise, I don't feel nervous. I really enjoy it. In fact, for me, it brings me a lot of satisfaction, and I jump at the opportunity to get up and speak. I think for me, I've been engaged for a whole range of different things, everything from MCs to keynote speakers to, panel speakers. So all of those things are really enjoyable for me, and I don't have any sort of I don't feel nervous. I just enjoy it. And obviously preparing sufficiently so that you do a good job is important, particularly when you're the MC and you've got to keep everything running really well. But I think if you know the topic you're speaking about, if you are really passionate, particularly about the topic, and you're enjoying the experience, that tends to come through when you're speaking. So yeah, I had an experience the other day where we had the launch party for the Sprott Methods site. And it was a really fascinating out-of-body experience because I realized I'm very comfortable public speaking, and I'm really happy when I'm directing, and speaking and in control of the actual speaking component. But when other people were speaking about me, and I felt that the spotlight was on me, and I felt this unusual feeling of, oh, I'm not comfortable. Everyone's looking at me, and they're saying all these nice things, but I'm feeling really embarrassed. And so normally when I'm doing public speaking, I don't feel that way at all. So it was this really strange experience, and I think it was good for me to understand, because that might be what other people are thinking or feeling when they're doing public speaking. Whereas I realized afterwards it was because I'm not controlling what's happening, and these people are talking about me in glowing terms. By the way, it was really, really amazing. Wonderful things that they were saying, but I just felt really quite overwhelmed, and it was a new experience for me.
Yeah, it's interesting you talked about that, because I had a very similar experience. I recently wrote a new book, Winning the War for Talent, and I did my book launch at the Brisbane Club, and probably about 120 people there. And of course, I love public speaking too, and I've done lots of it and so on. But then I had 3 people who had pre-recorded a bit of a testimonial about me. And when they play these testimonials, I'm not ashamed to admit that I got a bit teary, and because it's like your emotions are heightened.
Yes.
And I think standing on stage in front of 100+ people for me is definitely a space of vulnerability. And so I was like, oh, I really thank you so much. And but anyway, people thought I was a new age man, and so that was good. And
I'm glad to hear that, though, because I cried too. I could feel myself, and I could feel it was a funny feeling, because I was wearing this truly fabulous red velvet pantsuit, but I could feel my face going red, and I thought, oh my God, I'm just going to look like a giant tomato, because my face was burning, and it was emotion and just this feeling of like I don't know, it was a really interesting feeling. And I thought to myself, afterwards I really started to have that curiosity kick in about why was I going bright red? Why did I feel uncomfortable? And my daughter, who's quite introverted, she said to me afterwards, why did you have to, mention me in your speech? Because, I just was so embarrassed. And I was thinking, I wonder if that's how she was feeling. It's the feeling that I was having. It's interesting. And I think maybe also, I don't know about you, but I think I'm sometimes just so focused that I'm not actually thinking about positive feedback. And so when someone's saying it, not just to you, but in front of a whole bunch of people, it's actually, it's overwhelming.
Yeah, well, I had this experience last year where I went and did a stand-up comedian course at
Did you?
and it was a 2-day course, and it was fantastic at the Paddington Sit-Down Comedy Club. And then after you do the course, you have to come back and do a 5-minute comedy routine as that's the graduation. And so I did this. I put together my 5 minutes, and I did my 5 minutes, and it went over really well, and everybody was laughing. So that it's that direct feedback from the audience, that they didn't know me, most of them from a bar of soap, but they appreciated what I was saying and were demonstrating that by laughing. And I was incredibly nervous, did it really well, walked backstage, and suddenly the emotions that I felt was just, oh my God, it was almost debilitating. And I thought, wow, this is, because you, again, as a public speaker, you don't really get that immediacy of feedback. So
No.
If you want to be good at speaking, I mean, I have no aspiration to do comedy. I've done 2 5-minute comedy routines, and then I thought, that's it, I'm hanging up my boots now. Been there, done that. But it's a great way to build confidence and to learn some new skills. So before we get into your exciting adventures in Scotland, which I really, because I lived in Scotland also.
Did you? I didn't know that.
I'll come back to that in a minute. But, so before we get to that sort of the fun stuff, so those people who are listening to this podcast who perhaps are in an executive role, they're thinking about life post, full-time employment, what advice would you give them about how to actually curate, their future? Because I mean, really, if we break down everything you've talked about, that's what you've done, isn't it? You've said, I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I'm a mentor, I'm an advisor, I'm a etc. How did you say, this is the vision for what I want for myself, I'm going to curate for myself? Did it kind of happen by accident? And what would be your pearls of wisdom that you'd offer to people at the start of that? I hate to use the word journey, but at the start of that journey.
Look, there's a couple of things that I would say, especially that, we talked at the very beginning about the fact that we met when I was at Cardno, and I loved working at Cardno. Like, that was like, I would have been happy to work there for the rest of my life. That's how much I loved it. So it was it was quite challenging for me when that all came to a conclusion. And, the board work that I'd started doing while I was at Cardno was really not something that I'd pursued. It had come towards me, and it was with organisations that I trusted. So I was happy to sort of dip my toe in, but I didn't really have this grand plan of this is what I want to do longer term. I thought at some point it might be good to go onto boards, but I hadn't really, because in my mind I was going to be staying at Cardno until, almost until they put me in a box and took me out. That's basically how I viewed it. So, but what happened was when things all went to custard with Cardno, I had this kind of, opportunity to really think about how I wanted to go forward. And what I also realized was that I had spent most of my energies internally. I hadn't really spent a lot of time sort of, expanding my thoughts beyond outside of Cardno, because I was so consumed with that job and that organization. So it was an opportunity to really spend a lot of time, not navel gazing, but being curious about what actually makes me happy and what sort of stuff do I really love doing. And the truth of the matter is, I do really enjoy being on boards. I do enjoy strategy. So there's a real opportunity and I love learning about new organizations. And I really came quite clear on that as time went by, that there was a great deal of satisfaction to be had by engaging with lots of different organizations rather than just being in one. And so it was kind of it took a bit of time for me to get that clarity. And it was like, okay, I love strategy. I love engaging with different organizations. I really enjoy the kind of conversations you have at the board. Even as an executive, I loved going in and presenting to the board. So I got kind of clarity that that's what I like. I love working with C-suite and doing advisory work and senior executives. I get a great deal of satisfaction out of mentoring people coming up in their careers and seeing them go on to bigger and better things. and I love speaking and writing. So it was a case of how do you just keep on nutting that down into something that's really enjoyable and satisfies all of those different elements. So I think it just takes time and getting clarity about what you actually like.
Mm.
What do you actually like doing? Because I always find it interesting when you see executives go, right, okay, now I'm going to go into a board career, and haven't actually spent any time checking out what it's like to be on a board, or haven't really had any real experience in that space. And so I've often said to people, if you are really serious about, that ultimately being your goal, you should probably check it out and see what it's like in terms of, it's not for everyone. Not everyone loves governance. Not everyone loves strategy. Not everyone's going to enjoy reading all those papers. So I think it's good to try it out before you sort of go down that path, and just getting real clarity around what actually makes you happy in terms of your work and brings you enormous satisfaction. So trying out a couple of advisory boards, for instance, or a couple of, even going on a not-for-profit board where you volunteer for a while, something where you get to sort of try it on and see whether or not it's a good fit, I think is a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from my own experience, having done the graduate AICD course and also having been on a number of not-for-profit boards, it's definitely not for me.
Yeah, and that's all right. It's good to
Yeah.
know that, right? Because
Oh, for sure.
you have to also, the other thing is too, is I think you need to, I always say, it seems so obvious when you say it out loud, but not everyone thinks about it. You have to, if you're not getting paid, right? It's not for profit. You need to have passion about that particular cause.
Oh, you definitely
Because if
do.
you don't, just jump out, because it's going to
Yeah.
take up so much of your time and your headspace, and there's risk associated with it. So if you don't love the cause, just don't get involved in the first place. But if you love the cause, it's incredibly satisfying. And I think that also, just be really clear that governance is not everyone's cup of tea, and that's fine. But that's a lot of it is about governance and risk and strategy and all those things.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are probably a bit blinkered. They think, oh, well, I'm stepping away from my executive career, so the only option is boards. Whereas the reality is you're clearly demonstrating yourself, there's plenty of different things you can be doing. And whether that is speaking, mentoring, coaching, writing, etc. It comes back to, I think, what you said, dropping the word mediocrity, but it's what makes you happy,
Yeah, where do you get your joy? Yeah.
Yeah, and I tell you, for me, being on boards does not bring me joy, but for other people, they absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Coming back, for me, I love speaking. Other people hate speaking, so
That's right.
it's trial by error, isn't it?
Yeah. And also I think just getting to know and be honest with yourself. What do you actually really like? And when I spent a lot of time thinking about, what was it I loved about Cardno, like it wasn't the engineering, for instance. That was not what was floating my boat. It was meeting lots of different people. It was presenting, doing, lots of presentations. It was engaging with the other executives around the world and the board on strategy. It was doing mergers and acquisitions. That was the stuff that I loved. So, you can still do that stuff. You don't have to be in that role. And so then you go, how do you carve out a career where you get to do the stuff you love? And I think it just takes time, and it's different for everyone. Like I can tell you, being on the board of the RSPCA is incredibly rewarding, but very time consuming. But it brings me great joy. So for me, that is something I'm very happy to give up my time to do that, because I just love the cause and the people there, and it's, to me, brings me enormous satisfaction and joy to be involved.
Fantastic. And so let's sort of round out the conversation by talking about something that's, a bit more, not necessarily more fun, but a bit more of a personal nature. I've heard through the grapevine that you had an exciting adventure in Scotland, which included buying a property sight unseen. And
Yes.
I mentioned briefly, I lived in Dundee for a year back in
Oh,
1978.
right. Yeah.
My father was an academic, and he went there for a sabbatical year. So, but I was only 10 at the time, so it's a distant memory. But for you, this is a very recent thing, isn't it?
Yeah. And how I was saying about 3 years ago, I went through this whole thing about really getting clarity about what I want to do. Part of it was that, I went off to the UK for 3 weeks by myself. And I'm quite an extroverted sort of person. So I think a lot of my family and friends were concerned that I wanted to be alone for 3 weeks, but it was really because I wanted to do deep thinking about what I want to do with my career and my life, really. And so I left my 2 kids at home with someone to look after them, like I didn't leave them unattended. But I had spent my early 20s in England, and I had some of my happiest times were when I lived in the UK. And I just wanted to really reconnect to the people that I knew then. And I'd been a nanny then. All my boys are actually now in their 40s, which is incredible. But I wanted to reconnect with, spend time with that family. I've still remained very close to them. And I wanted to really explore my roots and get back to where all 4 of my grandparents had their roots in Scotland. And I do think there's something to be really gained by having perspective, by understanding where your ancestors came from. So, by the way, some of our ancestors did come from Dundee. So I found where they had lived, and it was pretty grim. So they made the right call, I would say. But I sort of went across the country exploring where my ancestors came from. And my grandfather on my dad's side, he'd immigrated out to Australia when he was in his early teens. And my grandmother on my mother's side had been brought out to Australia when she was 15. So I went around and had a look at all the places that they came from. And I had been to some of them before when I was in my 20s. But my gran on my mum's side, she'd come from a place called Rothsay on the Isle of Bute, which is not too far from Glasgow. And I've been there once before, but only stayed one night. This time I stayed, I think, 3 or 4 nights. And I found the house that she lived in before they left. And my great-grandmother was like a force. Like, she had decided that she was going to move to Australia, but she left her husband behind. There's all sorts of rumors as to what happened there. But she left poor William behind, and she took Mary, my gran, and her half-brother Archie to Australia. And William never joined them. And it's really interesting because William was a fisherman who was born on that island and died on that island. And I suspect that maybe going to the other side of the world to the Darling Downs was just a bit too much of a stretch for him. But anyway, it's a sad story because my gran never got to see him again, right? And she loved this place. She pined for this place. And in its day, it was the Ibiza of Scotland. It's like this amazing kind of beautiful beaches, and it's got these incredible Victorian mansions all around the bay. It's a really beautiful place. Also has some very dodgy little houses up the high street, which is where my family lived. They didn't live in any of those mansions. But anyway, so I'd spent a bit of time there, and I had a look around, and I went backwards and forwards on the street and the Mount Pleasant Road where her final, the house was that they'd lived in. It was this tiny little house. And by the time I got back to Australia, it just was in my head that I should have a look at how much the real estate was. By the time I got back to Australia, I'd found this old tenement flat in a building from the 1800s that was like 50 meters from my grand's house in the same street. And I knew exactly what the building was on the outside because I'd walked past it many times, but I obviously hadn't seen inside. So I put together a PowerPoint presentation, which I did to my family to show them why this was a good idea. But one of the main reasons I convinced them that I wasn't a complete lunatic is because it's called the Isle of Bute, and around the Isle of Bute is this body of water called the Kyles of Bute. Now, clearly, I took that as a core sign that from the gods that I should definitely buy this flat. So I did buy it, and it was just an extraordinary journey that has led to so many incredible things. So I renovated it from afar with help from people on the island, and then some people from off the island on the mainland. I engaged a local genealogist called Isabel from the local museum, who then researched William's family, and we discovered that there were 4 generations of his family who'd lived on that island. And because my flat's up high, it looks down on the village, and I can see where my ancestors all lived from my flat, from the back of my flat. And once I went to the museum to meet with Isabel and all these lovely old ducks who were there, very excited that this person was so interested. And they had all these photos out because some of the dwellings that my ancestors had lived in had been demolished. Some of them are still there. And they said, oh, we thought you'd probably want to have a look at what the original dwellings were like. I said, oh, yeah, absolutely. And in the photo of where my great-great-grandmother passed away, which is right down the bottom of my flat, I can see it from my kitchen when I'm making a cup of tea, there was a photo from her dwelling. And at the back of the photo, looking up the hill, you can see my flat. So she would have seen my flat. And my great-great-grandmother, who died of exhaustion at the age of 38, who couldn't read or write, would never in her wildest dreams have thought that one of her descendants would actually own some property on this island. So it's a very sentimental thing, but I have, once I got to know more about William's life, I found his grave. So every time I go there, I take flowers to his grave to tell him he's not forgotten. And I found out which was his tartan, the Morrison tartan. And so the flat is decorated in the colours to signify that tartan, which is like navy and dark green. Thankfully, I like those colours anyway. So it was this like real labour of love. And it's just, I really love it now because we found the original fireplace. So I got a wood burner into the original cavity of the fireplace where, there's been probably hundreds and hundreds of fires, thousands of fires over the years. And it's decorated with a mix of furniture finds that I found on the island that are antiques, with some new things. And it's very sentimental for me because one of the few possessions that my great grandmother brought to Australia was this Robert Burns commemorative plate, which having researched it, looks like it was a wedding gift for her and William. So she brought it all the way out to Australia. After she passed, it went to my gran. After my gran passed, it went to my mum, who then gave it back to me, and I took it all the way back to Scotland to the flat. And in my mind, I'm like, well, William, here you go. Your wedding present is right back where you used to live, 50 meters from your house. It's just really nice. And one of the things that I just love about it is that not only is it this great connection back to my ancestors and just having this great sense of connection to that community, but I've made lots of friends on the island, lots of friends in Glasgow and Edinburgh. And so when I go there, I know the people in the butcher, I know the people in the coffee shop, I know the people in the secondhand shop, and I'm good friends with my Scottish solicitor, Gianna. So I'm never lonely when I go there. And it was really quite inspirational to me to also have that kind of humility that we were talking about before, of understanding the sacrifices that my ancestors made, and how important that is to just keep front of mind to say, if just one of them hadn't been brave enough to make some of those moves to Australia, I wouldn't exist. So all these people had these brave moments that have led to my existence. And so it's important to be respectful of that and have humility and work hard. And that's why the little unicorn in the Sprott Methods is very sentimental for me, because it's a nice little nod to my Scottish ancestors. And in the flat, I bought this beautiful brass unicorn in an antique shop near Dundee with my mum when I took her back there for her 80th birthday. And I remember showing my mum and I said, this is going to be the logo for Sprott Methods. And she just looked at me like I was completely mad. And I said, I know you don't think it makes any sense, but it makes sense to me. And so for me, it's very sentimental to have created this opportunity for our family to finally own some property on that island, but also to have this connection back to where my ancestors came from, and then to be able to make this sentimental reference in this business, the Sprott Methods business. So
that's awesome. What a great story. And so if people wanted to, can they find it on Airbnb and book it for a week, or is it purely for your own personal use?
Well, actually, there's a blog. I have a blog that's it's called www.thekylesofbutte.com. So people can go in there and check out it has all that thing about writing. It's got all the stories about my family, but also the renovation story and stories about the actual island itself, which is a pretty spectacular island. So people, if I tend not to put it on Airbnb because the Scots are very, very, very smart when it comes to money, and they make it quite tricky to do the Airbnb thing. And but I do have friends who stay there quite regularly. So if you're a friend, I'll let you stay.
Oh, fantastic.
So I have some friends from England who are going to stay there in 2 weeks' time, actually 1 week's time. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So Kylie, before we wrap it up, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would like to talk about today?
Oh, I feel like we've covered so many topics, and I'm just really grateful that you're interested. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk about my work and to talk also about my Scottish roots. I really appreciate it.
Oh, look, that's been an absolute pleasure. And, I've the entire time I've known you, I've always been, found you very inspirational and, such a force. So it's great to have the opportunity for you to, explore and talk about each of the different facets of things you're doing. And I wish you all the very best with your new endeavors, and look forward to hearing your success stories. And, potentially, who's to think there might even be some collab opportunities there in the future.
Oh, I hope so. That'd be great. It'd be great if we could do something together. So, and thank you. That's very kind. Those words are lovely. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, Kylie, thanks again, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Okay, you too. Thanks, Richard.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Arate podcast with Richard Triggs. We frequently feature guests from organisations we are currently recruiting to build the company brand as an attraction strategy for candidates. If you would like to promote your organisation's brand as an employer of choice, please contact Richard directly on 0403 588 517 or via email richardt@arateexecutive.com.au.